Today we're going to be talking about the FXLion Nano Hub. Now this is a bit of a niche device that allows you to power multiple different devices with different voltages, all from one power source, which could be the USB-C power delivery or a DTAP battery. Now I originally got this so that I could power my FX3 from the V-mount battery that I already owned via USB-C, but I've found since owning it that it's got a range of other uses as well. The Nano Hub comes in this small little protective case. Inside you'll find the Nano Hub itself, as well as a DTAP to DTAP cable. This is what I use to connect to my V-mount battery. The only other thing not included in the packaging that I think you should get is a short DC barrel to DC barrel cable. This is what I use to connect to my external monitor if I'm not using the DTAP cable, or to plug in things like the little LED panel, as they often have DC barrel inputs. Aside from the power connectors, this is a super simple device. There's a 1/4" thread here, which I've used to attach a smallrig Nato rail to, and there's also a hook thread connector here if you wanted to run something through there. Aside from that, there's nothing else. There's no power button, there's no Bluetooth app or anything. You just plug in a power source, plug in what you want that needs power, and it's good to go. Conveniently, all the voltage inputs and outputs are labeled on the device itself. The DTAP port accepts 10 to 16.8 volts at up to 10 amps. And if you are powering via DTAP, then the output DTAP port will output the same voltage as it's inputting. The USB-C power input accepts 5, 9, 12, 15 and 20 volts, all at 3 amps for up to 60 watts of power. The USB-A output supports Quick Charge 3 and will output 5 volts or 9 volts at up to 2 amps or 12 volts at up to 1.5 amps. There's also 7.4 and 12 volt DC outputs. These both support up to 3 amps and use DC barrel connectors that are 5.5 by 2.1. Make sure you're plugging into the right port, as they both are the same size connector and there's no color coding to differentiate them. Our first test will be powering the FX3 via USB-C while also powering this external monitor over DTAP. Now I wanted to power this FX3 via USB-C rather than with the dummy battery for a couple of reasons. One, it means I can leave the factory battery in there so we get a little bit more capacity. Two, I've heard some horror stories of people breaking FX3s with dummy batteries, but I've never heard of it being broken via dodgy power delivery. And three, if the camera was to run out of power, if this battery suddenly just died, that means that with USB-C, it would just stop charging. The camera would keep recording and we'd be fine. If I had a dummy battery and it suddenly ran out of power, the camera just turns off and doesn't save the file it's currently recording, which just sounds like a nightmare to me. So that's why I wasn't even considering a dummy battery. I really don't like cold shoes, so my preferred connector is the Nato connector. So I just slide that in here into the Nato receiver that I've mounted onto my rig, lock that in. From here I use the provided FXLion cable to plug the DTAP in the top there, but it can go into either port, and then also plug that into my battery. From here you'll have the blue light there, so you know that the device is working correctly. So our first test, we've got the core Nano battery going via DTAP into the Nano Hub, and then I've got a DTAP coming out for the external monitor here, and then I've also got a USB-C port coming out of the Nano Hub and directly into the FX3. Here I'm using a power meter so I can measure how much power, and I can see it's drawing about 8 watts. When I plug this in over USB-A, it draws nowhere near that amount of power, so this is definitely enough to keep the camera fully charged rather than just trickle charging it. We'll also do a quick test with a Fujifilm camera just to make sure it works for those as well. So my X-T4 is currently drawing 10 watts at 15 volts. This is definitely a lot more power than you get out of a USB-A port trying to charge this camera. Our second test is using the V-mount battery to charge the camera while also powering this external monitor, just like the first time, but I've added to the USB-A output and plugged that into this HDMI Mars transmitter. Now this means that I'm powering 3 devices all at once off the Nano Hub, and it's all working fine so far. I'm now going to plug into this DC barrel output, and then plug the other end of this cable into my Yongnuo monitor. That worked perfectly. So I've got the one battery here powering the Nano Hub, and from there it's powering my external monitor over DTAP, my FX3 via USB-C PD, my video transmitter via USB-A, and this LED panel that I'd never actually have on my rig via 7 volt DC, and I've still got a 12 volt DC power output available if I wanted to plug in something else. It's amazing how well it works. I've tested the receiver, that's working fine. The LED panel can go up to full brightness, so there's no problem there, and there's no noise or interference or anything. Everything's working perfectly. Obviously, aside from this battery, I've also got the little battery in the FX3, just so if there was a power failure, I wouldn't lose whatever I'm currently recording. But that battery stays topped up at 100% because of the USB-C PD power connection. Our next test will be powering consumer devices. So in this case, I've got a 2018 iPad Pro and an iPhone 11 Pro, and we're going to try and power that via a DTAP battery using the FXLion Nano Hub. All right, so for this one, I'm using USB-C to USB-C to power the iPad and a USB-A to Lightning to power the iPhone. I've got the watt meter on the iPad, but I don't have one for the iPhone, but we'll see how we go. The iPad's drawing 15 volts, but between 8 to 12 watts because it's at 96% charge, so it's almost fully charged, but it might draw more if it had a lower charge. My iPhone's also charging, but I'm not sure how quickly because I don't have a tool to measure that. So this would be really handy if you're out in the bush or somewhere else outdoors where you don't have access to power, but you want to charge your devices because you're on a long shoot day. Now we'll try using USB-C PD for input. I'm using my 16-inch MacBook Pro charger, which I think is around 87 watts. And then out of that, I'm going via DTAP into my V-mount battery. Now at the moment, it's drawing between 0 to 50 watts. The number keeps fluctuating, but the charging indicator is on my V-mount battery. So it looks like if I was out in the field and I didn't have my DTAP charger with me, I could use this to charge the battery. And it is drawing quite a bit of wattage, so it should charge it relatively quickly. Our next test is powering a small HD 702 Touch via USB-C. So this usually only accepts a barrel DC voltage or NPF batteries, but what we've got here is the USB-C coming from a MacBook Pro charger, converting that into the DTAP connector and then plugging that into the external monitor. I'm also using a barrel connector to power the video receiver, and this means we've got a nice viewing station using just USB-C power. Now we'll go one step further and use a USB-C power bank to power this same setup. So I've got the HDMI receiver again and the 702 Touch monitor. They're drawing about 21 watts from this. Now the specs on this say it can output up to 30 watts, so we're nowhere near the limits of this power bank. And I know more modern, more expensive power banks are capable of outputting a lot more power. So this would be another alternative. Instead of having multiple NPF batteries to charge all this, you could run it off one USB-C power bank, which is generally cheaper than a bunch of NPFs or V-mount batteries. Things that could improve this device would be more mounting points around the device, perhaps on different sides. That way you've got more places you can mount it. Color differentiation between the 7 and 12 volt outputs, which personally doesn't affect me, but I know some people that need a specific voltage would love that. And thirdly, I'd love to see a little screen on this device that would tell you how much power it's drawing and how much power it's outputting. Just that way I don't have to use external devices to measure it. I know it sounds like a nerdy thing, but if you know how much power it's drawing, then you can work out how long your battery is going to last. So I'd really appreciate that. Overall, if you're looking for DTAP to USB-C power delivery or vice versa, or any of the other power inputs and outputs this provides, then I'd highly recommend it. I've had it for about 6 months now and it's worked perfectly in all the combinations I've tried it, and I've never had an issue with it. If you've got any questions, leave a comment below. Otherwise, smash that like button and I'll catch you in the next video.